Welcome to Unit 3. And in this unit, we will be covering chapters 6, which is on social emotional development in early childhood, and then chapters 7 and 8, which will look at middle and late childhood. So, in chapter 6, social emotional development during the preschool years, the major topics are emotional and personality development. I'll cover that in this first lecture. And then in the second one, we will cover families and then talk a little bit about perhaps peer relations, play, and media screen time. So let's begin with emotional personality development. And there are advancements in all four of these areas during these preschool years: the self, emotional development, moral development, and gender. We'll cover each of those in this section, concentrating mainly on moral development and gender. But as far as the self is concerned, I want to take us back to Erik Erikson and his theory on the psychosocial stages of development that we looked at in the first unit, and it came up again in the second unit. Now we're to his third stage, from 3 to 5 years of age. Remember, the first one during the first year of life was trust versus mistrust. And then from 1 to 3 years of age, we had autonomy versus shame and doubt, where children learned to do some things, that they could do things for themselves, such as potty training and maybe feeding themselves or putting their own clothes on. Uh, in this third stage, from 3 to 5, we have initiative versus guilt. And initiative, as it says here, is about making things happen. Um, Autonomy was about being able to do some things on your own, because it was important after your infancy, when you couldn't do anything. You learned to do things on your own. Now you learn to make some choices or decisions on your own, and that's what we mean by initiative. They're, they are, you know, deciding to what they want to eat now, or what they want to wear, or pushing back against some of the rules that the parents might lay out. Well, you said this, but I want to do this. And so there's going to be, and there's going to be a little friction between preschoolers and parents as they try to exert their initiative. They will sometimes do things that the parents won't be happy about. Okay, as it says here, initiative at the bottom, initiative and enthusiasm may bring guilt, which lowers self-esteem. Uh, it may result in guilt, their initiative, if they're doing things that they are harshly criticized or punished for, as they try to make some choices on their own and decisions on their own. Like I said, they're going to push against the rules a little bit, and if they're always made to feel that what they did was wrong, then eventually they'll start feeling guilty about the choices that they make. And they'll start feeling like any choice they make maybe is wrong. And so this can affect their self-esteem. In the third point, it says the great governor of initiative is conscience. You know, once once a child builds up a conscience, this will help to control their initiative. They'll realize, I can't just do everything I want. The rule, there's a purpose for rules. Um, so this is the initiative versus guilt stage, and it is just some examples. I'll just throw a few examples. I mean, think of a child, maybe a preschooler decides to answer a phone. They may have never done it before, but they watched other people, so they hear a phone ring, they pick it up and answer it. I mean, it's not uncommon for a preschooler to do something like that. Uh, they're showing initiative. Oh, I've never been told to do this, or I've never been shown how, but I think I can. I think I can answer this phone. And so, well, as a parent, you've got to be careful not to make this some huge transgression. They're exerting initiative. They think it's the right thing to do to answer the phone. If you yell and criticize them, this is where once again the guilt's going to come in. You're going to lower self-esteem. Uh, in In the previous stage, from 1 to 3, a child may learn to how to feed themselves using a fork or a spoon. Now they might move on to not just being able to do the motion of feeding themselves. They may make a decision to get their own bowl of cereal, and they get the milk out and the cereal out, when the parents not watching, and this might be a recipe for disaster. So once again, it could lead to a situation where they fail in their attempts at initiative, and we have to be careful as parents not to be too critical or harsh as they demonstrate this initiative. That initiative is something that we want in them, later in life as they go into middle and late childhood and eventually adolescence. I mean, initiative is a good thing. So they start flexing their initiative muscles in the preschool years. And as a parent, we do have to, if things are really bad that they do, if they're dangerous or life threatening, or they may cause injury, we obviously have to clamp down on that initiative. But we have to let them try things and fail, even if it might make a mess, like a spilt bowl of cereal, or they answer a phone that you didn't want them to answer. I mean, uh, this is the idea of initiative. Okay, let's go on. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we earlier called the self-conscious emotions. Remember, there were basic emotions that you were born with and that showed up in the first half year of life. And then there was a second class of emotions, self-conscious, or what sometimes is called other conscious emotions that show up later, is beginning maybe in the second year of life. And some of these are going to become much more common during the preschool years. Uh, some examples of these emotions are pride, shame, embarrassment, and guilt. And we see pride and guilt becoming more common in the early childhood years, the preschool years. Um, um, One thing I like to just briefly touch on is what is the difference between shame and guilt? I mean, most people have some idea, but often they're used almost interchangeably. Um, and there is kind of a specific difference between them. And then with shame being a harsher, deeper felt emotion. I mean, guilt is feeling bad about a behavior that one has done. So if a child, let's say, punched their little sister and hurt the little sister, I mean, it's okay if they feel guilty about it. It's okay if we help them feel a little bit guilty about that, because obviously it's a behavior that harmed another. They should feel some guilt, and the guilt can be constructive. It can help them change their behavior in the future because it's a negative emotion. Shame, on the other hand, is feeling bad about who you are. So not one specific behavior, but who you are as a person. So shame is I'm a bad boy or I'm a bad girl, not that I did something bad. And so it is a much deeper emotion. It's touching on the sense of self and a child's self-esteem. And it these different emotions come about depending on how we criticize or punish or talk to our children. Um, I'm very much against telling children that they're bad boys or bad girls. Um, Telling them or using other things to suggest that their very core, their very essence, that they are somehow bad or wrong. I mean, what we should do is talk about the behavior specifically. So when a child does something wrong, make sure you specifically reference behavior. So when my daughter was young and drew all over the wall in crayons, we talked about the behavior of her drawing on the wall and how it was going to be a real pain to clean it. And that let's see if we can, work on getting rid of this behavior. I love you, but I don't love this behavior. And so you separate the behavior from the child, as much as possible. You talk about the behavior as if it's a separate thing, um, because in most cases, this is children showing initiative. Often when they do things wrong in the preschool years, and my daughter was showing initiative. She wanted to create a beautiful drawing of a scribble drawing. Anyway, so you deal with the behavior separately, and you don't say that the child is bad in any way. And And if you think about one example, you may think, well, what difference does it really make? You know, I say bad boy, bad girl, whatever. I mean, but understand that. Think about all the years you're raising a child as a parent. I mean, it's going to be thousands and thousands of times that they hear this. If that's your go-to, if that's the way you know normally respond, a child may hear it again and again and again, and once again, it can be actually thousands of times that they hear that they're a bad boy or a bad girl, and it does have an effect in the long run. It's the attitude that there's something wrong with them. And so always try to address behaviors, and it turns out to be much more effective. And you can get the child to be on your side to get rid of behavior. Let's get rid of this bad behavior. What would be something else you could do instead of drawing on the wall? And in my case, I bought my daughter a blackboard, and she loved it, and she never drew on the wall again. But I think it is important in the long run that we think about things like that, but not shaming our children. It's okay to make them feel a little bit guilty. This is a behavior we don't like, but I love you as a person. It should be how we talk to them. Okay. One last thing about these self-conscious emotions. These are taught emotions, as it says in this last point. We tell our children when to feel these emotions. So you should feel bad about biting your sister. We might say you should feel guilty, or you should be ashamed of yourself. And we tell children when they should be proud of themselves for something they've done. So these are actually taught emotions. They're influenced by the expressions that parents use towards the children, or the parents or other caregivers or teachers or whatnot. Okay, going on here. Okay, well, let me just read what's here first. Children's understanding of the emotion is linked to an increase in pro-social behavior. Preschoolers when they start understanding what others are feeling, this can lead them to do nice behaviors for other children. So they try to cheer up another child that's crying, for instance. They begin to understand that the same event can elicit different feelings in different people. This comes around 4 or 5 years of age. They realize that we don't all feel the same way anytime something happens in the world. And by age 5, children start to be aware that they need to manage their emotions, and to try to fit the rules of society and the norms of society. And so they start engaging in regulating their emotions, and this plays a key role in their how they get along with others. If a child is better at regulating emotions, they tend to be more popular. They tend to have better social relationships. It's because they're not throwing fits, with when another child does something. They're not attacking other children if they can regulate their emotions. So it's much more pleasant to be around a child that has some emotional control, particularly things like anger and frustration. One way that we help children to learn to regulate and control their emotions is by the way that we talk to them as parents or caregivers about emotions. And the book talks about 2 different types of parents as far as dealing with children's emotions. The first type is emotion coaching parents, and these are parents that monitor the emotions of their children. They're very interested in what their children are feeling, and these parents see negative emotions as a teaching opportunity with their children. So when the child feels bad, they can teach them something about feelings and emotions. They can coach the child in how to deal with their negative feelings. You're really mad now, let's work on what you could do to control it. Or you're really sad, let's think about what you could do, what kind of strategies you could use to make yourself feel better. Emotion coaching parents tend to be less rejecting of their children, and they use more praise with them. So emotion coaching is dealing with the emotions, talking to the child about the emotions, strategizing about how to control the emotions. So you're giving them the skills they need to to learn to regulate their own emotions. Emotion dismissing parents, on the other hand, tend to deny, ignore, or try to change the negative emotions they see in their children. Sometimes they're just simply ignoring them. Oh, they're sad. Let them get over with it. I'm going to leave them alone because they're angry or sad or upset in some way. And let's just let them deal with it. And that's, and there are parents that do that. Think it'll be better if they learn to handle it. But yeah, you're not really giving them any tools to handle it with. The other thing that often emotion dismissing parents do is they try to cheer their children up. They'll try to change their negative emotions to positive emotions. This is a very heartfelt response. I completely get it. It's like they're really upset, so maybe I'll give them a candy and they'll feel better. Or they're upset, so I'll make some funny faces to try to make them laugh, so that they stop crying. So it's about changing their tears into laughter. And like I said, I get it. On the surface, it seems like it's a very caring thing to do, to try to get rid of their negative emotions and make them feel better. But it's so much better if you can teach them how to get from that negative state to a positive state without your help. It's kind of like give a man a fish thing and he eats for a day, and you teach him to fish and he eats for lifetime or whatever that saying is. But you want to give them the tools, and you're not, if you simply help them feel better by giving them a candy bar or something like that, you're not really teaching them about their emotional states and how to control them. Okay. And as I already kind of mentioned, the ability to modulate emotions benefits children in their relationship with their peers. Children gravitate more to other children that can control their emotions. Okay, let's go on here. The next major topic is moral development. And moral development involves thoughts, feelings, and behavior regarding rules and conventions about what people should do in their interactions with other people. So there's a thinking aspect, thoughts. There's moral thinking. There's moral feeling. Emotional. How emotions play into morality, and there's emotional behavior. Moral behavior. And different researchers tackle each of these points differently. So we're going to begin with moral feelings, and this is what Freud thought was important. He said that this is basically from Freud. Feelings of anxiety and guilt are central to the account of moral development. So we try not to do things that are wrong because they make us feel anxious and guilty. We try to do things that are right because, on the flip side, they make us feel good about ourselves. And so Freud really thought, is our feelings about our behaviors that are going to make us be moral and try to do the right thing and not do the wrong things. So what Freud says is that to reduce anxiety and to avoid punishment, children, end up internalizing their parents' standards of right and wrong, and they develop a superego between the ages of 3 to 5. So right in these preschool years, they develop a superego, which is kind of an internalized sense of right and wrong, like a conscience. The superego is basically like a conscience. And so once again, this comes from the parents. They adopt their standards and make them their own. And this is going to follow the Oedipus or electric complex. I'm going to talk about those more in the gender section. Okay, so emotions and guilt motivate your behavior. Moral reasoning is about how we think about morality rather than how we feel. And Piaget had some things to say about moral reasoning. He had a theory with basically 3 stages. The first stage is called heteronomous morality. This occurs between 4 and 7 years of age. Justice and rules are conceived of as unchangeable properties of the world, removed from the control of people. So in this stage, you believe that laws and rules are fixed for all time, that they're not changeable. Children at this age, for instance, don't like it if you try to change the rules of a game. I mean, once they've learned one set of rules, it's like that's the way you play this game. And if somebody else introduces a different set of rules for that game, they would protest about it. No, you can't do that. You can't. Those aren't the rules. I know what the rules are. So they believe that there would only be one set of rules. They can't just arbitrarily change them. So this is how they feel about right and wrong and laws and norms and rules of their parents, that they're all set in stone. And they also believe that right and wrong is tied to consequences, not intentions. Doesn't matter why you did something, it's just the end result. So if you give a child in the stage a little scenario where John accidentally breaks, I don't know, 5 plates. He trips and falls and breaks 5 plates. And then there's Susie, and Susie breaks 2 plates completely on purpose. She just wanted to break them for fun. And then you ask them, who's more wrong, John who tripped and accidentally broke plates, or Susie who purposely did. They will say John did because he broke 5 plates. And Susie only broke 2. So it's all about the end result and not what you meant to do. Um, there, there is a second stage not listed here. It's basically a transition stage. It doesn't have a separate name. It's between 7 to 10 years of age. And in the second stage, you're going to show, as you transition, you're going to show both types, heteronymous morality as well as autonomous morality. Okay, so there is a transition from 7 to 10. And then you reach the third stage at approximately the age of 10 or older. You reach autonomous morality. Older children become aware that rules and laws are created by people. So no longer are they set in stone. You start realizing that the rules are flexible, that they're made up. So they may not always be right, or they can be changed if they turn out not to, that they're not working anymore. And so they start realizing that there's flexibility. And now they also flip on the idea of, consequences. Originally, consequences were more important than intentions. Now they take intentions into account as well. So if you give them that same scenario, Susie breaking 2 plates on purpose versus Johnny breaking 5 by accident, a child in this stage would say that Susie's really more at fault, more guilty. I mean, Johnny just had an accident. Susie was being a little brat and throwing plates against the wall. Okay, so there is a shift from immorality. So from kind of preschool years until later childhood, and that's kind of those are Piaget's 3 stages in a nutshell. This is not a huge major kind of theory. I mean, it's one part of his whole cognitive development theory. This is still Piaget. He talks about immanent justice. This is something that those in the first stage, the heteronymous stage, those that think that way, believe in immanent justice. So the 4 to 7 year olds, that if a rule is broken, then there will be punishment, and it doesn't matter if the rule is broken in front of other people or not. The immanent justice idea is that you will get punished in one way or another. So let's say a child, I don't know, does something wrong at home, breaks a rule, and no one sees it, and then they're walking to school and they trip and fall in a puddle. Well, they very easily say, "Oh, that's because I broke that rule earlier," and they believe that they're connected. So because they believe rules are set in stone, they also believe punishments are set in stone, and that they happen whether or not others observe you or know about what you've done. Right. Parent-child relations in which parents have the power and children do not are less likely to advance moral reasoning. Piaget believed that parents, they can help a little bit advance moral reasoning, but not very much because they just hand rules down in an authoritarian manner, as it says here. So children aren't really made to think about the rules, so they just learn what the rules are and that they should not break them. Where Piaget says you really learn about morality is with your peers. He says when children are with their peers, there's a natural kind of give and take of between peers where they have to decide what's right or wrong, and they have to make up rules often when they play games or things like that. So there are transgressions that happens in peer groups, and the peers have to kind of act as jurors in deciding, well, was that was that wrong? Was that right? I mean, like, what is this one person more at fault or this other person? I mean, let's say there's a fight or something in the peer group, and there was discussion about these things. So you get to, in a peer group, you get to really kind of think about right and wrong, and and you kind of think why something is right or wrong. You kind of play with the rules a little bit. When children are with parents, I mean, they just completely believe, okay, that's the rule. No use thinking about it. I just can't do it. All right, let's go on. So we had that was kind of about moral thinking and how you think about rules, and then we have the behavioral and social cognitive approach, which has to do with behavior, specifically moral behavior. And of course, whenever we talk about behaviorists or social cognitive theorists, it's always the same few kinds of elements in their theories: reinforcement, punishment, imitation. Behaviorists always believe in operant conditioning as the way that we learn things. So reinforcement and punishment, once again, remember that comes from B.F. Skinner. And then imitation comes from the social cognitive theorists such as Bandura. Another word for imitation is observational learning. And these three mechanisms, reinforcement, punishment, imitation, they use them again and again to explain different things that we learn. They use them to explain how we learn language, how we learn morality, and they use them to explain how we learn gender. I mean, it's always these mechanisms that are at work. But in this case, for moral behavior, when children are reinforced for moral behavior, they will likely repeat that positive behavior. When they're punished for immoral behavior, negative behavior, these behaviors are likely to be reduced or diminished over time. The behaviors, however, did not feel that using punishment was any better than using reinforcement as a parenting technique. Skinner kind of cautioned against that. Even though punishment can work, it has negative side effects. You can always kind of get to the same end result using reinforcement rather than punishment. As far as imitation goes, when models who behave morally are provided for children tend to imitate them. As long as they like the model, whether it's a parent can be a model, or an older sibling, or a peer, or a teacher. When children respect or admire somebody, they imitate their behaviors. And so over time, your negative behaviors get punished away, your positive behaviors get reinforced, and you copy good behaviors from models that you admire, and then your moral development gets shaped over time this way. They do point out that the situation is very important in influencing behavior. So what children do in one situation may only be weakly related to what they might do in other situations. And there was a major study that in the behaviorist history from long ago. I don't even have a year for you or anything, but or an author, but it was a major study just showing basically that children's behavior is not consistent as far as morality across situations. So a child that might cheat in one situation, in another situation where they could also cheat, they may not. Where a child might steal in one situation and they don't steal in other situations. where they lie in one situation, they don't lie in other situations. So, and just because a child cheats doesn't mean they're also going to lie or steal. I mean, these things, these behaviors really don't always go together, and often don't go together. That it's the situation, the particular situation that determines, okay, who's going to do a moral behavior here, who's going to do an immoral or negative kind of behavior here, and so situation's important. And if you think about your past behaviors, I mean, probably the ones that you see as negative or immoral, some of the things that you're kind of ashamed of in your life, and maybe you did behavior that wasn't very good. I mean, like, probably you kind of explain it away because of the particular situation you're in. Well, I don't really believe in stealing, but there was this one time and it made completely sense because of this reason. Or I don't believe in harming others, but it was okay when I did this because that person deserved it. We situations often cause us to do behaviors that we may not believe in, but in that particular situation, it feels right. Okay. So situations always influencing behavior. Okay. And finally, conscience is, the ultimate goal of moral development is the internalization of morality. Developing a conscience. And this would be integrating your moral thinking, your feelings, your moral behaviors into kind of a set of an internalized set of right and wrong. And one thing that helps with children developing a conscience is when parents are proactive as far as teaching the children morality. And by proactive, what I mean is that you try to prepare children before they get into trouble, before they do things that are wrong. So you have expectations for the behavior. Before they've done something wrong, you tell them, hey, these are things that you shouldn't do. These are things that you should do. Rather than what some parents do is waiting for children to have transgressions, and then they act as moral police, and they go in and punish the children and try to teach them what they should have done instead, what was right. But acting as moral police and just punishing transgressions is not the best way to teach morality. It's better if we can prevent the children from ever doing transgressions in the first place. So I talked about this with infants and toddlers, like in another section, that we shouldn't be slapping our baby's hand, for instance, when they reach for things they shouldn't be reaching for. We shouldn't have those things in reach of them, obviously. So we can prevent them making those errors by controlling the environment. That would be being a proactive parent. If you see a child about to do something wrong, like maybe you got a preschooler that looks like they're about to have a meltdown, and I mean, as a proactive parent, you would step in and prevent it before it happens. You might do a little distracting. I know I talked about emotion coaching, but you might do a little distracting originally just to calm them down, and then you can talk about it later. But rather than being the parent who says, "Oh, I think they're going to do something wrong," and they wait and watch them to do that wrong thing, so that they can then step in and punish them for it. Like this is some great learning device. I mean, a better learning device is stepping in before they do the wrong behavior. And once again, also expectations are very important in this proactive approach. Letting children know what kind of behaviors are expected of them ahead of time. Okay, so don't just be reactive, like being what's called a moral police, but be proactive in trying to teach morality before children mess up. And our last major topic in this first section is gender. And we'll just cover a couple slides on this. And first of all, a couple of definitions. Gender identity first is a sense of being male or female. Most children acquire this by 2.5 years of age. They know that they're male or female, or at least have some sense of it, what it means. Gender role is a cultural set of expectations, how we should act, feel, and think depending on what our gender identity is. And gender typing is the acquisition of a traditional masculine or feminine role due to the societal expectations and influences. Uh, during preschool years, we see that children increasingly act in ways that match the culture's gender roles, at least typically. It's preschoolers who more and more do what the tend to more and more do what the culture prescribes. So children will play with trucks and wear blue, and girls will tend to wear dresses and play with dolls, and because this is what gender kind of prescribes and rewards. There are many biological influences. Certainly, biology plays a role in we can't deny it plays some role. I'm not really getting into the biology section, but chromosomes, hormones, evolution are all possible biological influences. You can read more about them in the book. But I will talk more about the social influences. And there's a few theories that touch on the social influences of gender. The first one comes from Alice Eagly, Eagly, Eagly. Alice Eagly. She has the social role theory, and she says that our gender differences result from the contrasting roles of women and men in society. In a typical society such as ours, women have less power and status than men do, so they become more cooperating and nurturing and less dominant and assertive because their role prescribes these kinds of behaviors. If you don't have uh, if you have less power and less status, you better be somewhat cooperating or nurturing, and not be dominant and assertive because society doesn't allow for that. And according to her theory, if you have power and status more so because you're born male, then you can afford to be a little bit more dominant and assertive in your personality traits because you already have been granted power and status due to being male. So, anyways, she says so. Our personality characteristics follow our roles in society, and this is what makes men and women different, and women more cooperating and nurturing, and men more dominant and assertive. Okay, the second one is psychoanalytic theory. This is Freud once again, and he says that during preschool, a child develops a sexual attraction to the opposite sex parent. This is the Oedipus complex for boys, or Oedipus. It's spelled Oedipus. Oedipus. There's a similar one that's not as well known, but for girls, it's called the Electra complex. Electra, Tra. Look at those. Anyways, they're basically the same thing, that the child in preschool years kind of has an attraction for the opposite sex parent. So the Oedipus complex is that boys want to be with their mother in the same way that their father is with their mother, um, and eventually, so they may see their father as a rival. They may even have thoughts of getting rid of their father, or that would be nice if he was out of the picture. But this is going to make them feel anxious because they do have feelings for their father. It's not like they hate him or anything, but they want to be with their mother. So this is going to create a lot of anxiety. I want to replace my father, but he's there, and I love my father. And so in order to resolve this anxiety, what the children does is they end up identifying with their same-sex parents. So that boy is feeling guilty about wanting to replace his father. So now he says, okay, I'm going to be like him instead. Instead of replacing him, I'll just be like him. So the boy takes after the father and then takes on his behaviors and traits and his morality and his gender activities, and this is where the boy learns to be male and act like a male. And then the same thing happens for girls, and the opposite. They end up identifying with their mother and doing more female behaviors because they copy her and want to be like her. So this is also, just to go back the last section, this is also where he says the superego develops. The superego, the conscience, you know, develops after the resolution of the Oedipus or the electric complexes. Um, when the child identifies with the same-sex parent, they also take on their morality, the sense of right or wrong. Okay, and finally we have the social cognitive theory. This says that children's gender development occurs through observation and imitation of others' words and actions. So we once again copy models, those that we admire and love or admire or want to be like, and we imitate and their words and actions and become more like them. And according to social cognitive theory, this we will tend to want to emulate and admire, those of the same gender as ourselves, those of the same sex as ourselves. So I will look up to my big brother, for instance, or maybe my father, maybe an older peer, a male peer, and I would copy their behaviors and actions. So as a young child, you might see me pretending to shave and things like that. And a girl is going to emulate females and copy their behaviors, and so they might pretend to do dishes during their playtime, because they watch their mother do it. And also, just to tack onto this, I mean, the behaviorist ideas, also besides imitation and observation, they will also be rewarded and punished, for gender appropriate or gender inappropriate behavior, which is the operant conditioning would come in as well. Okay, those are three theories. Our last slide on gender is this one here, and there's some parental influences that are mentioned. I'm going to leave those for you to read on your own. Parents influenced by both action and by examples. Once again, we know often that children are copying them and imitating the behavior. So they, based on how parents act and how they respond to the children, they certainly are influencing their gender roles. There's also peer influences. The peer groups are actually, let me just start with this quote. I mean, as the book says, the playground is often considered gender school because when peers get together in a place such as a playground, they will respond to each other's gender behaviors. They will model gender behaviors for others. For older children, will model them for younger children. They'll be rewarding and punishing of gender behaviors, appropriate versus inappropriate. So, as an example, if it's okay for a girl to bring a doll with her to the playground, but if a boy walks into the playground with a doll, some of the other boys are going to tease him, and so he will get punished for his behavior. The girl will be rewarded because some friends, other girls might come to help to play with the dolls with her. And so there is, when you get with peers, there's a lot of pressure to conform to do gender conforming behaviors. And this is particularly true more so for boys than for girls. There's more pressure on boys to conform to their gender roles versus girls. Just think, for example, of when a girl grows up to be a tomboy. Think about the term tomboy. It's not really negative. A lot of girls are proud to say they're tomboys. So they like to play some rugged sports or, and do some stuff that guys do. I mean, it's not really negatively looked upon. If you think about words for boys, though, that do more feminine behaviors, I mean, one of the ones that pops up a lot is sissy. And that's, if you just think about that word, it has a lot more negative connotations. I mean, tomboy, it's okay for your daughter to be a tomboy, but you don't want your son to be a sissy. And, I'm just speaking from a, typical, parental kind of figure. And so it is looked down upon more, and particularly amongst peers. Girls let other girls get away with their tomboy behavior. Boys really kind of jump on and punish boys' sissy behaviors, wearing a dress, playing with dolls, and things like that. Preschoolers, just a few things about preschoolers. Peer groups, they prefer socializing with the same gender beginning at about age 3 or so. We can clearly see this. It increases throughout childhood, becomes more prominent. They like to be in their own genders. There's some reasons for this. Group sizes tend to be different because of boys and girls do different activities. So boys congregate in larger groups or clusters. Well, why is this? Because boys often like to play games and sports, and you need a larger group for that. So they do competitive play, as this is in this third point here. Kind of rough and tumble competition play and risk-taking kinds of activities. Whereas girls tend to have conversations or what's called collaborative discourse. And so a smaller group is better for that. You don't need 10 in a group to have discussion. You just need a few. Whereas boys need 10 if they want to play a game of road hockey or basketball or something. Finally, we have cognitive influences. We have in gender schema theory. Gender schema theory says that we gradually develop gender schemas just by our interaction with the world. Starting from the time we're an infant onwards, and we learn what's appropriate or inappropriate from a gender standpoint within our culture, and our schema gets formed. These are the same schemas that I talked about with Piaget. They're generalized concepts in the head, and so just like your dog schema is going to form as a youngster, as you come in contact with dogs mentioned in books, and then you come across live dogs that maybe your neighbor has, or maybe you have a dog at home, and you over time you form your dog schema because there's been examples, and then you use that dog schema to understand dogs in the future. Same thing with gender. You learn through storybooks. Hey, look, it seems like policemen and firemen are always males in these storybooks, and nurses and stewardesses are always females in these storybooks. At least oldie time classic storybooks, and you see television shows that promote these same ideals, and the boys wear blue and the girls wear pink, and so it's in the books, it's in the TV shows, it's in how your parent, what your parents buy for you and how they treat you, and it's in your peer group. So over time, this gender schema forms. This is what boys do, and this is what males do. This is what girls and females do, and then you don't. And then once that forms, you don't need others to punish your behaviors or reward your gender appropriate behaviors or punish your inappropriate behaviors. You do it yourself. Basically, you police your own behaviors because you have a schema. When we have schemas that we develop, we live by them. That's what schemas do. They help us adapt and live and adjust to every environment. We use our schemas constantly to make sense of the world. So if I've developed a schema based on all my exposures through books and media and parents and peers, I will live by my schema. Oh, boys don't play with dolls. I'm going to put that doll down. Oh, I can't wear that. That looks too much like a dress. Or, oh, I better get my hair cut. It's getting long. Girls have long hair. And these are all parts of my schema. And so I don't need others to tell me. I live according to my own schema. And that's what gender schema theory says. We have all these influences, forms of schema, and then you live according to what your schema says. Okay, and that is the first part of chapter 3. The second part will deal with families mainly, and then a little bit about screen time. And so stay tuned for that.